Tenet is the new film by Christopher Nolan, just been released in cinemas, starring John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, and Kenneth Branagh. It is the first film that I think many of us will have seen at the cinema in about 6 months or so. It's actually the first film I've seen at the cinema since December last year, since the last Star Wars film. So it was quite an occasion for me. Um, and the cinema going experience, I have to say, this time round was different. Cinema I saw this film at was relatively quiet. We were sort of escorted in wearing face masks and then seated in separate groups so that there was social distancing. I thought the cinema going experience was very nice. It was very refreshing. It really sort of warmed my heart, to go back to the cinema, something that I love doing after so many months, and it felt perfectly safe to do so. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Um, the film itself, Tenet, uh, is a film that is a bit hard to digest. I have to say. I think this is very possibly a film that my opinion will evolve on over time, and it is a film I do plan to return to. But I'm going to have a stab at sort of articulating my opinions of it just now. Um, and I think my overall impression of the film was positive. I liked it. Um, Beyond just the sort of novel experience of going to the cinema, I did think it was a very good film. Christopher Nolan for me is one of these directors. He's like whether it's David Fincher, Quentin Tarantino, Denis Villeneuve. He's a director who, if something gets released by him, I will see it because there's even if they're not always perfect. His films do have a consistent level of quality, of imagination, of craftsmanship that just has to be supported. It annoys me sometimes when people like to say, "Oh, there's no talent in Hollywood anymore," or films these days just aren't as good as they used to be. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, you can look at any decade of filmmaking and see that there's always been good films, there's always been bad films. Um, there hasn't been a sort of there was never a golden age where just all films were good. And there's certainly good films being made today, and Tenet for me is proof of that. I don't love all aspects of it. I'm going to get into. I'm going to discuss the good parts first, and then some things that I found not necessarily bad, but maybe just sort of questionable. Um, and as I said, first time seeing the film, it is a film I'll watch again. But these are just my sort of raw thoughts. This isn't a lot of the reviews I've done so far. Is I've looked at the film in hindsight. They're films that I know quite well. But this is like a new film. This is just my early sort of thoughts on it. So overall, I say the film as an experience was very good. It's a 2.5 hour film that flies by. I mean, I thought the pacing to this was breakneck. It was almost too fast. You're struggling a lot of the time to keep up with the plot because Christopher Nolan just likes to cut to the chase. He doesn't waste time explaining things. He really just wants you to go with the film's premise, and I think that's admirable because it is a very novel, very unique, interesting sci-fi premise. Something that I've not really seen done before. I mean, plenty of time travel movies, but the way that this film handles it is quite unique, and it lends itself to a lot of really expertly shot, really brilliantly conceived sort of action scenes, set pieces, where they're using this inversion technology as they call it, and it looks fantastic. I mean, it's really a really sort of drawing in film. It's a film that you really um, like seeing the spectacle of it, and you really like seeing the action. Um, and from that perspective, I thought the film was deeply intriguing. Great experience overall. The look of the film, the cinematography, is magnificent. It's Hoyte van Hoytema, who's the cinematographer. He collaborated with Nolan on Interstellar and Dunkirk. He also did Spectre, which is one of the best looking bad films ever made. He also did Ad Astra with Brad Pitt. And I think his cinematography style is he lends itself well to like sort of high concept sci-fi and action. He's got a very clean style of cinematography, very crisp, and it works very well in this film. And in the scale, the task for the filmmakers here must have been extraordinarily difficult because you've got these scenes where you've essentially got someone moving forward in time, but someone moving backward in time, interacting in the same scene and in the same shot. It must have been a nightmare to film, but it looks amazing. I mean, the spectacle of the film from that perspective is worth the price of admission alone. Um, I actually thought the performances in the film were really, really interesting. You had John David Washington, the son of Denzel Washington, as the protagonist. He's not given a name. Um, he gives a really sort of magnetic performance, as does Robert Pattinson, who I must say I was quite surprised. Well, I've been quite surprised by the fact that he has established himself as a very talented and very well respected actor. I mean, I can remember the days where if I saw he was in a film, you would think, oh God, no, not the Twilight guy. But he's full respect to him. I mean, he's a really talented actor. Really good performance in this. The scenes were just really entertaining. You're always in the film. You're looking forward to seeing the scenes where he was in because it was such a sort of an interesting character. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with the Batman film if it ever gets released. Um, the overall plot of the film, I mean, it wasn't. I don't think it was heavily thematic, to be honest. But the plot as a whole, the story, the technology in it, was deeply engaging in a way that few films these days are. It's a confusing film in a lot of ways, and I'm going to get into that when I discuss some of the negatives of the film. But another way to look at that is that it's also a challenging film. And I like films that can do that. They don't just spoon feed you information. It's not an expository film. It's a film that really does challenge you to think about it. And I think that's got to be respected. I like films that can be that cerebral and that can um, really challenge you on a deeper level. And I think whether this film is overall successful in that is another question. But at the very least, it does draw you in. It does sell you on this premise, and it does make you think about it, and it definitely invites repeat viewings, which I do plan to do when this film comes out, maybe on DVD. Um, and I guess I should mention it's a spy thriller. Christopher Nolan himself has mentioned that he's always been drawn to this genre because of the sort of aesthetic, the action scene, but also because it lends itself to having a film take place in a wide array of locations. And that's something I quite like in this film. I think one of the best ways to describe this film. This is what I've said to a few people who've asked me how it was going to the cinema again. Uh, it was a three-in-one experience of things that you could do sort of carefree before lockdown. Okay, so one is the obvious, going to the cinema. Two is by virtue of this film being in lots of different locations, it was a bit like being on holiday. There's all these different scenes in different places around the globe, and it was like, oh, that looks really interesting, that looks really beautiful, that looks like a lovely place. So it was like going on holiday, and then the third is due to the sort of very loud style of sound design that Christopher Nolan has, where the sound is so loud, it's so blaring in your ear, it pulsates through the floor. It was like being at I don't know a disco or a nightclub or a concert hall, with loud sounds, loud music. Probably the loudest things I've heard since lockdown started. It was really a sort of sensory experience in a way that um, I guess you just don't really get. I mean, cinema. Maybe it's because I'm used to just watching films on TV, at low volume or whatever. But to go in to get that cinema experience of sight and sound um, was really something. I really got a lot from it. Um, so I think that's the good of the film, and overall it was a good experience. In terms of things that didn't really work for me, the plot of the film is deeply, deeply confusing. Um, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I did look up the Wikipedia plot synopsis after I saw the film. I didn't, not before. I didn't want it spoiled, but I did look it up afterwards to try and connect the dots with some things that happened in it. And it's a very confusing film, and I'm not altogether sure if it all makes sense. So I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt. But there is that niggling feeling the longer I think about the plot of, is this film too smart for me, or am I too smart for it? And with Christopher Nolan, I mean, he knows his stuff. His stories always have a lot of thought. I mean, he's been working on this for about 5 years. Um, but I do question it because some of the things in the film go by so fast that it's really hard to clock on whether it makes sense. And another something that ties into that actually is the sound design of the film, which is a controversial point among Christopher Nolan films. He's fond of having uh, background noise of the music and sort of sound design being louder than the audio of characters. Um, which in this film I thought was a problem because a lot of the time, I couldn't really understand what some characters were saying, particularly in the third act, like with the sort of final action scene. Um, Aaron Taylor Johnson plays a character, and honestly, I couldn't understand a word that character was saying. I'm so looking forward to once this film comes out on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, watching it with subtitles on. You know, because I think that's the only way I would really get what's actually being said. Because I mean, if I was watching that film at full volume in the cinema and I couldn't understand what people were saying, I mean, I don't know what chance you would have watching it just on television. So I'm looking forward to watching it with subtitles and maybe understanding it a bit better. Um, the editing for the film, I've not read anyone talk about this actually. I thought there were some clumsy editing moments in the film. There's a scene at the beginning where John David Washington meets Robert Pattinson and they're in a casino or something. Um, the scene ends with the protagonist just like he's in a chair and then immediately he goes to stand up and then it's a hard cut. And it really stood out to me as sort of clumsy because I mean, normally you wouldn't end a scene like that. You would end with them both sitting down and then new location, or they both stand up and go somewhere. But the fact that it edited hard as he is like in the middle of standing up, I thought it seemed strange. And there were a couple of other scenes like that I thought it just seemed odd to me. And I don't know if that's because the film's coronavirus it hasn't been finished, or if it was just something that Nolan put in there. I mean, I don't know. It just seemed really odd that there would be such kind of basic editing mistakes in the film. I don't know if maybe there's more to it, or maybe I'm just looking into it too much. I don't know, but it stood out to me. Um, Kenneth Branagh in the film plays a like a Russian oligarch type character. He's a villainous character. Um, that's a bit of a questionable role for me. I think when you see a sort of British or American actor put on a Russian accent, it kind of veers into cartoon territory for me a little bit. I couldn't always take him seriously in the role. I think also because it's Kenneth Branagh and he's like such an established like sort of British thespian almost, I mean, and he's just putting on this really hammy accent. It didn't work for me really. Maybe if I watched it again, I don't know. Maybe it would grow on me, but when I watched it in the film, it kind of took me out of it a little bit. Although I liked the idea of the character, the relationship, the sort of hold that he has over this woman, kind of Blue Velvet overtones almost. I thought, but I liked the plot use. I liked the sort of science fiction ideas around it. I just didn't really like something about the character rubbed me the wrong way. Sorry, something about the performance rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't. It took me out of the film. Um, some critics I've read kind of criticise the film for having no heart and no humour. I think to say that it's got no humour is a bit sort of perfunctory. I don't like that as a criticism. Films don't need to have humour to work. I mean, it sometimes helps, with action films. It can help draw the audience in a little bit. It can help you sympathise a bit more with the lead character or whatever. Like a Die Hard or something. But it's not essential. I don't think you need it. Um, I mean, the idea that the film has no heart, I think that does have some traction actually. Inception, Interstellar, some of Nolan's earlier films. One of the most memorable things about those films is that they do a very good sort of emotional course to them. This film doesn't really. There aren't any personal stakes. There's a little bit with Kenneth Branagh's wife, without going too much into spoilers, but it's not developed too much. It's certainly not the core of the film. John David Washington's character, Robert Pattinson's character, there's not really anything going on there on a sort of emotional level at all. And I had to think about this because normally that is a problem for me in films. I can think of a long list of action films that I've seen that just didn't work for me at all because I didn't get invested in the characters, and then hence I didn't really get invested in the action or the story. Um, this film, I think the lack of emotion is kind of counterweighed by the intrigue of the plot and the spectacle of the film. Just because it's such a novel idea for a story, um, you know, such an unusual experience as you know of a film. I think that's what sort of pushed the scales for me and made it a good film, and that's why the lack of sort of character heart didn't really bother me too much. And as I said earlier, the performances are good. They are very strong, but it's just yeah, the characters don't really have a lot going on beneath the surface, which is I guess might be a problem for some people. It might even be a problem for me one day. But at the moment, you know, I watched the film and it didn't bother me too much. It didn't hamper the experience too much. But overall, Tenet is a deeply engaging, sort of fascinating film. I would say if you feel safe going to the cinema, it's 100% a film to be seen in the cinema. Um, it really did remind me of some of Nolan's earlier films, like Inception. You know, with just that really powerful imagination that Nolan has, both as a storyteller and as a director. You know, in his craft of filmmaking, it's really impressive to see. There are issues with the film, certainly, but ultimately, I think a Nolan film does have that sort of level of quality that you would expect that made it really really quite a powerful film to see, and one I'm really glad that I did see. Um, and I really do like films like this where it is just it just unfolds, you know, in your head after you watch it. It lingers with you, and there's sort of ideas that you can explore, even if not all of those ideas work, even if maybe the plot on close scrutiny doesn't really work. It is nonetheless deeply engaging and deeply engrossing. Um, so from that perspective, I was hesitant about giving a rating actually because I think it's a film that I will change my mind on someday. You know, if I see it again, if I do get around to watching it with those subtitles on. I'm comparing it to other films that I've seen. Um, I think the rating that I'm going to give it, just based on what I've said just now, sort of formulating it in my head, is 74 out of 100. Which is, I think that's a bit more than what I thought I might give it, but just based on the spectacle alone, based on the sort of ingenuity of it, um, it gets a 74 from me. I mean, something like Inception, I mean, I thought that film was sort of near perfect. I would give Inception maybe like a 89 or 90. So this isn't his usual this isn't his usual standard Christopher Nolan's, but it's still really damn good. It's still a really good cinema going experience. And it gets a recommendation from me.